Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Earthly Headlines. Today's headline has to do with Easter Island, or Rapa Nui. As you may or may not know, Easter Island is a super mysterious and small island that was supposedly first occupied around 900 years ago. Well, depending on who you ask, either the year 500 in the Common Era to about 1100. I mean, that's like a span of 600 years, but it's relatively young compared to everything else, depending on who you ask. But there have been a lot of like fringy science people. I don't mean to disparage anything. I'm not saying that they're pseudoscience or anything, but people who or researchers rather, or people who are interested in the subject, they say that the colonization of the island goes back way further. It was somewhere along that line. It was deserted, and then it was repopulated way later, which is like the 900 AD date that I talked about. It's a place that, if you don't know about Easter Island, it's home to over 1,000 of these statues with giant heads called the moai, which you can see here in this photo. The title of this article kind of explores the possibility that they did not collapse like most people said they did. The story is that there was some sort of violent uprising, some sort of coup, and they just warred themselves out of existence, basically. But the really interesting part about this article is how they came to this not really a conclusion, but their conclusion was it might have ended differently. And the way they did this is they analyzed the tools that they used to make these giant statues, and they kind of tried to pinpoint not the exact location where they quarried these stones, but how, like, the manner in which they did. So what am I talking about? Let's just go well, before that, let's just go on with the article. Just a little bit about the island before we kind of kick this off. I want to give you guys a little backstory. So Easter Island is off the coast of South America by quite a lot. I mean, you can see this map right here. The actual island itself it's really small. It's about like less than 64 square miles. You could tour the whole thing in a day in a car. And there's really, aside from the moai, there's really not much there. There's volcanoes, a lot of stone. There's like one lake, and then there's a huge volcano in the middle of it. Well, there's one big volcano, and then there's another one, and then there's one on the eastern coast. Pretty interesting. But you wouldn't expect, well, at least I didn't when I saw this, you wouldn't expect a large-scale civilization living here. I mean, it looks really tiny, right? So I don't know if they did a lot of farming, but I don't know what they did to sustain their population. But anyway, here's a larger scale. You can't see it. If you look at my cursor, it's about like right here. You could see the string of islands right here. And then Easter Island is about right there. So it's close to South America, but it's not that close. I mean, it's still pretty a long boat ride off. And the story is that some Polynesians took 2 boats and went across the Pacific and landed there and populated the area. So these are some of the Easter Island heads here. This image on the left is pretty famous. It's these people here you see are from UCLA. They're excavators, and they found out that these statues actually go way down underneath the ground. And I'd like to draw your attention here on the bottom at his hands. His hands are folded right under his navel, and I'll get into that later, but there's a parallel there. More images of the moai here. All right, let's get back to the article. So these researchers analyzed the chemical makeup of the tools used to create the big stone sculptures, and archaeologists found evidence of a sophisticated society where the people shared information and collaborated. So they think that in order to create all these stone structures, there must have been some level of collaboration. And their suggestion is that because it required so much collaboration that they couldn't have a violent uprising and killed each other off. My focus isn't on that though. My focus is on the actual stones in the quarries. So because I have a few thoughts about Easter Island as well. The idea, so the lead author Dale Simpson Jr. states, the idea of competition and collapse on Easter Island might be overstated. To me, the stone carving industry is solid evidence that there was cooperation among families and craft groups. Now, I don't know who was disputing that. I mean, that makes sense to me. One guy obviously didn't create all those stones and prop them up and place them precisely where they are. So there's got to be more to the story than just there was a military coup and everyone died because they killed each other. So it's just more of the backstory. The first people arrived on Easter Island about 900 years ago. Hatotu Matua was the first chief who came from Polynesia, led 2 canoes, and then populated the island. The population rose to thousands, and they formed a complex society that carved the statues that we know today. They became partially buried over time, and the moai, which represent important Rapa Nui ancestors, number nearly 1,000, and the largest one is over 70 feet tall. The ancient Rapa Nui had chiefs, priests, and guilds of workers who fished, farmed, and made the moai. There was a certain level of socio-political organization that was needed to carve almost 1,000 statues, says Simpson. That makes sense to me. There must have been some sort of cultural infrastructure in place in order to get anyone to collaborate and make something as complex as this. It's kind of, if you go back to my Göbekli Tepe episode, it's very similar reasoning as to how they built Göbekli Tepe. Because I think there were other scholars before. I think the scholars nowadays in terms of Easter Island, they're kind of coming around to it being more the construction of these structures are more complex than the original story, which was hunter-gatherers built these. But the thing that messes with my mind is I just showed you how small Easter Island is. What is there to hunt and gather here? I mean, what is there to hunt and gather and support a huge population and also build all these stones? This map shows all the stones here. So there's something off about this story. Well, at least I've always thought there was something off about this story. But anyway, let's continue. Recent excavations of 4 statues in the inner region of Rano Raraku, the statue quarry, were conducted by archaeology UCLA director Joanne Van Tilburg along with Rapa Nui excavation team. They looked at 20 of about 1,600 stone tools made of basalt that had been recovered in the excavations. About half the tools, which they call toki, were fragments that suggested how they were used. So instead of looking at the stones themselves, they're going to look at the tools and try to see if they can get any conclusions from there. There are at least 3 different sources on Easter Island that the Rapa Nui used for material to make their stone tools. The basalt quarries cover 12 square meters, the area the size of 2 football fields, and those different quarries, the tools that came from them, and the movement between geological locations and archaeological sites shed light on prehistoric Rapa Nui society. Basalt is a grayish rock that doesn't look anything special, but when you look at the chemical composition of the basalt samples from different sources, you can see very subtle differences in concentrations of different elements. So they used a mass spectrometer to measure these different concentrations, and from there they were able to derive exactly which quarry they came from. Remember, these are the stone quarries that they used to make the tools, not of the statues themselves, which is really interesting. They found that the majority of the tools came from one quarry complex. Once they found the quarry they liked, they stayed with it. For everyone to be using one type of stone, I believe they had to collaborate. That's what she said. They were working together. She believes this contradicts the popular narrative that the inhabitants ran out of resources and then they went to war. I think that's really weird too. I think there's a lot more to the story. I think both can be true depending on what point in history. Because there's war. Wherever you find humans, there's probably war, especially when it comes to land and stuff. And if what they say is true, that there's like a huge population and they were successful, then there's bound to be some sort of conflict. The near exclusive use of one quarry to produce these 17 tools supports a view of craft specialization based on information exchange, but we can't know at this stage if the interaction was collaborative. It may have been coercive in some way. Right, that's true. They might have been slaves or something like that. That's always a possibility. Human behavior is complex. This study encourages further mapping and stone sourcing, and our excavations continue to shed new light on Moai carving. Okay. What happens in this world is a cycle. What happened in the past will happen again. Most people don't live on a small island, but what we learn about people's interactions in the past is very important for us now, because what shapes our world is how we interact. Right. A couple of questions about this, and the article kind of ends there with that they shed light on human interactions and stuff. So there's something that bothers me about this. Okay, there's two things. Robert Schoch, the guy who redated the Sphinx, and wrote that whole thing about water erosion of the Sphinx and how it goes back almost like 10,000 plus years. He believes that Easter Island, there's a quarry that's now underwater off the side of the island. So if you look at if you try to imagine this as 3 dimensions, there's like a cliff, right? And it comes out of the water. Well, there's a lot of it under the water. And according to Robert Schoch, there's a quarry there because there's stuff that looks obviously like people were chipping away at it and taking the stone and bringing it up. And if that's true, if there is a quarry underwater, which is probably true if Robert Schoch's talking about it, then there were people on the island when the water levels were lower, and the water levels were lower 10,000 plus years ago. So there easily could have been a society an even bigger society than the Rapa Nui that we know of today, that were thriving. The second thing that I find is interesting is the language, the Rongo script that has yet to be deciphered, and even the inhabitants of the of Rapa Nui, the quote original inhabitants from 980 onward, even they say that they don't know what the Rongo script is saying. They say that the only literate people within were the priests of their society that knew how to read it, and they no longer exist. So what is a Rongo script? Why are there weird carvings that no one can understand on these? And also what I said earlier about the folded hands here, where in the front. This is Easter Island. This is Göbekli Tepe. Easter Island, Göbekli Tepe. Easter Island, Göbekli Tepe. Göbekli Tepe, right here. And Easter Island. So, is this a coincidence? I don't know. It seems really... Okay, the 2 definite pieces of information that we know are likely true. One, Easter Island was there probably with the stones 10,000 plus years ago when the water level was way lower. Göbekli Tepe, same thing. We know for a fact that it dates to that time as well. And then this architecture is similar like this, the way they have the hands, the fingers, the hands right next to the navel. Is that a coincidence? Is that just parallel thinking but in ancient times? What did this whole network, what did all this look like when the sea level was lower? Because right now it looks like just a long series of islands, but are these just tops of mountains? I mean, obviously with Easter Island it is, because there's a quarry underneath. So what is going on here? There's got to be more to the, because we know for a fact that if you look on this side of the map where Australia and Indonesia are, you can see the shallowness of the water here. And they know that back then when the water level was lower, that these were connected. So how is this any different? There is a big mystery here that people aren't taking into account. So how does this tie in with this article? Well, this article is this article doesn't mention anything that I said, but it's good that they're exploring the fact that there was some sort of stratified society that even made any of this possible. So maybe they're right. Maybe they did quarry these stone tools from one quarry. But the fact that they were organized enough to do that and agree, and then decide to create these stone monoliths, that doesn't even if that's true, that doesn't necessarily mean that it happened in 900 AD. This probably happened way longer, because remember, you can't date stone, and the only carbon dating that's been done on Easter Island is stuff from like the 1800s that they found as a result of slash and burn technique. They found charcoal and burnt wood, and they carbon dated that to the date that they have now. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that's when all human contacts are. They just haven't found everything yet. Maybe everything's underwater. So anyway, that's enough ranting for me. What do you guys think? Am I too woo-woo? Is this all figment of my imagination? Or does this at least merit some more work? Because again, Robert Schoch, he's a geologist that said that there's a quarry underneath the water. And if he's right, why is there a quarry underneath the water? Why is there a quarry there when there are other quarries? So that right away dates the quarry 10,000 plus years, which by definition should date the whole settlement of the island back then. And there's no funding. Either there's no funding, or no one's got the time or resources to really look at that part. Thank you guys. Please leave me some comments below. What do you guys think? Am I getting too aggressive here? I don't know. I'm not mad or anything like that, but I just think it's super interesting and it merits more investigation. Thank you guys. Have a good weekend. I'll see you on Monday.